Echo Chronicle 001. The Gorge of Eradus. Miro and the map that should not exist. A story from the realm of Elderwyn, discovered within the echoes of Vespera. Prologue. The Wanderer Among the Trees. Not every echo begins with a memory. Some begin with a question. Since his awakening, the Druid had wandered through the hidden and forgotten corners of Vespera. He had listened to ancient voices, recovered lost stories, and discovered places that had not been seen for countless years. But with every echo he found, he began to understand one thing more clearly. Vespera was not only a world filled with memories of the past, it was a world filled with stories, still waiting to be written. One day, his journey led him to Elderwyn, a realm where forests were older than the roads that passed through them, a place where people said the trees remembered. The rivers had their own moods, and some paths decided for themselves where they wanted to lead. For many travelers, Elderwyn was a confusing place. For the Druid, it was one of the most fascinating realms in all of Vespera. Deep between the ancient trees, he sensed an echo. But this echo was different. It was not old, it was not fading, it was not forgotten. It felt as if it was only beginning to awaken. The Druid followed the signal, past roots older than kingdoms, past stones covered with symbols that no one could read anymore, until he finally reached a small village at the edge of the forest. There, he did not find what he expected. Not a powerful wizard, not a brave warrior, not the guardian of an ancient secret. He found a boy with messy hair, a bag far too large for him, and more rolls of parchment than any reasonable person should ever carry. His name was Miro, and Miro was a mapmaker. Chapter 1. The Mapmaker Whose Maps Were Never Right. Miro loved maps. He loved everything about them, the lines, the symbols, the idea that a small piece of parchment could hold an entire world. There was only one problem. Miro's maps were wrong, always wrong. Whenever Miro drew a river, the river decided to take a different path the next day. Whenever Miro marked a hill, the hill suddenly disappeared. And once, Miro spent 3 entire weeks creating the perfect map of a small forest area. The next morning, the forest had moved 2 miles north. The villagers thought this was quite funny. The forest probably did too. "Maybe you should draw something else," his friend Lyra said one morning. Lyra was the complete opposite of Miro. She liked things that made sense, straight lines, clear answers, things that stayed in the same place today as they were yesterday. Basically, everything Elderwyn was not. Miro shook his head. "The maps are not wrong." Lyra looked down at the parchment. It showed a river flowing directly through their village. Then she looked outside. No river. "Miro." "Yes, there is no river." Miro nodded. "Not yet." Lyra sighed. She did that quite often when talking to Miro. But that was exactly what made Miro different. Others drew maps of places they had discovered. Miro drew maps of places that were waiting to be found. And on this particular morning, there was a map lying on his desk that even Miro could not explain, because overnight, something had changed. A new line had appeared in the middle of the parchment. A path he had never drawn. It led deep into the oldest part of Elderwyn. And at the very end, there was only one word: Eradus. Miro stared at the name. He knew every hill, every river, every forest path around his village, but he had never heard of Eradus. Suddenly, a calm voice spoke behind him. Perhaps because Eradus was not ready to be found. Miro quickly turned around. Standing in the doorway was the mysterious wanderer, the Druid. And without knowing it, Miro had just taken the first step into an adventure that would become a new echo of Vespera. Chapter 2. The Map That Should Not Exist. Miro had seen many strange things in Elderwyn. A tree that only told stories when it rained. A stone that became offended because someone confused it with another stone, and a small stream that refused to flow downhill because it preferred the view from above. But a map that drew itself? That was new. The Druid looked at the parchment for a long time. A faint light moved through his eyes as ancient symbols appeared and disappeared across its surface. Finally, he spoke. This map carries an echo. Miro frowned. An echo? The Druid nodded. A trace of the world. A moment important enough that Vespera chooses to remember it. Miro looked proudly at his map. So it is a special map. Perhaps. A magical map. Perhaps. A map created by a great mapmaker? The Druid remained silent. Lyra crossed her arms. He said perhaps, Miro. But he did not say no. The Druid smiled. No one in the village believed following the map was a good idea. This did not surprise Miro. After all, most great adventures started with someone saying it was not a good idea. So he packed his bag, parchment, ink, his compass, which was wrong most of the time, and enough food for 3 days. Lyra looked inside the bag. Miro. Yes? These are only cookies. Miro nodded. Enough cookies for 3 days. You cannot survive 3 days eating only cookies. Have you tried? Lyra opened her mouth, then she closed it again. She hated when Miro was technically right. The Druid followed them to the edge of the ancient forest, the place where the trees grew so tall that their crowns seemed to touch the clouds. You are not coming with us? Miro asked. The Druid looked into the forest, then back at the young mapmaker. Some paths only appear for those who are meant to walk them. Miro looked at his map. The line on the parchment began to glow softly. So this is my path. That is something you must discover. That is not a very helpful answer. The most important answers rarely are. Miro thought about this. Then he nodded. He did not really understand it, but it sounded exactly like something wise people usually said. And so Miro and Lyra entered the oldest part of Elderwyn, a place where even maps were not always sure, if they wanted to be maps. Chapter 3. the forest that did not like maps. The first few hours were surprisingly normal, at least normal for Elderwyn. A few trees moved around, a mushroom wished them a good morning, and a small bird followed them for almost an hour, only to find out if humans were really as terrible at flying as everyone said. Then the path disappeared. Just like that, in front of them was forest. Behind them was forest. To the left was forest, and to the right also forest. Elderwyn was very good at reminding visitors that it was, in fact, a forest. Lyra picked up the map. The path is gone. Miro looked at it. No. He pointed at a thin line. It is just somewhere else. Miro, paths cannot simply be somewhere else. At that exact moment, a small trail moved between the trees behind them. Miro looked at Lyra. Lyra raised one finger. Do not say anything. They continued walking. The deeper they travelled, the stranger Elderwyn became. They found flowers that only bloomed when nobody was watching. They crossed a bridge that only appeared after they asked politely. And eventually, they reached a clearing filled with ancient statues. The statues showed travellers, adventurers, explorers, each of them looking in a different direction. In the centre of the clearing stood an inscription. Only those who do not seek to own will find what is hidden. Lyra read the words quietly. What does that mean? Miro thought for a moment. Maybe it means that Eradus does not want to be found, just so someone can say, I discovered it. He looked down at his map. Maybe Eradus wants to be found because it needs someone to listen. For the first time, Lyra did not disagree. As evening arrived, they reached the end of the forest. The trees opened, the wind became silent, and in front of them was something that should not have been possible. The Gorge of Eradus. It was larger than anything Miro had ever seen. Massive stone walls disappeared into the clouds. Waterfalls vanished into endless depths. Ancient trees grew from the cliffs themselves. And somewhere far below, something moved. Miro took out his parchment. For the first time, he wanted to draw a map that was truly correct. He placed his pen on the page and stopped, because the gorge moved, not the wind, not the trees, the gorge itself. And from deep below came a sound, slow, powerful, ancient, a breath. Chapter 4. The Gorge That Slept. For a long moment, nobody said a word. Not Miro, not Lyra, not even the wind between the trees. It felt as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then, the gorge moved again. A deep rumble travelled through the ground. Small stones rolled down the enormous cliffs. The waterfalls changed their paths, and slowly, Miro began to understand something that should have been impossible. The Gorge of Eradus was not just a gorge. Miro, Lyra whispered. Yes? Please tell me you see this too. Miro slowly nodded. I think. He looked down into the endless depths below. I think the gorge just breathed. Another deep rumble followed, but this time it sounded different. Not like an earthquake, not like danger. It almost sounded like laughter. Deep below them, something slowly opened between the ancient stones. Two enormous lights appeared in the darkness. Miro stepped back. Then he realized they were not lights, they were eyes older than any kingdom of Vespera, older than the paths of Elderwyn, perhaps even older than the trees themselves. A voice filled the entire gorge. It did not come from one direction, it came from everywhere. After all this time, someone has finally found me. Miro swallowed. He had imagined many things: a hidden temple, a forgotten city, maybe even a treasure. He had not expected the place itself to speak to him. "You are Eradus," he whispered. The cliffs moved, the trees trembled, and the ancient being answered. That was the name given to me by the first wanderers. Eradus told them his story. Long ago, he had walked through Elderwyn, an ancient being made of stone, earth, and roots, a guardian of the deepest forests. But the world changed. Small villages appeared, new paths were created, new stories were written, and Eradus grew tired. He only wanted to rest for a short while, at least what a being like Eradus considered a short while. Unfortunately, 1,000 years for Eradus felt like a long afternoon. While he slept, forests grew upon his shoulders. Rivers found paths through his stones. Animals created homes between his roots. And eventually, even Elderwyn forgot that the great gorge had once walked. Miro listened quietly. Then he asked, "Why did you call my map?" The enormous eyes looked at him. "Because everyone else tried to map me. They came with measurements, with plans, with the desire to prove that they had discovered me. But nobody ever asked if I wanted to be discovered." Miro looked down at his parchment, and for the first time, he understood. Chapter 5. The Map for Eradus. Miro sat down at the edge of the gorge. He took his pen and began to draw. Lyra sat beside him. "What are you doing?" "A map." She smiled. "Of course. But not of Eradus." Lyra looked surprised. "Not?" Miro shook his head. "I think that was my mistake. I always thought maps were supposed to show the world where everything is." He looked at the ancient being below. "But maybe they are supposed to remind us of what we have seen." So Miro drew. Not the depth of the gorge, not the height of the cliffs, not the exact position of every tree. He drew the world that had grown upon Eradus, the little creatures between the roots, the rivers flowing across his stones, the forests protecting him. He drew everything Eradus had never seen, because it had grown upon his own back. When the map was finished, Miro placed it before the enormous eyes. for the first time in centuries. Eradus saw what he had become, not a forgotten gorge, not an old stone giant, but a home for countless living things. For a long time, Eradus said nothing. Then the earth gently moved, and all across the gorge, small golden flowers began to grow. "Thank you, little mapmaker." Miro smiled. "Does that mean my map is finally correct?" Eradus remained silent for a moment. "No." Miro blinked. "Oh. Tomorrow a new tree will grow. A river will choose another path. And perhaps I will move a little." Miro looked down at his map. Then he smiled. "Then tomorrow I will make a new one. And for the first time in a very long time, the Gorge of Eradus, Laugher." Epilogue: A New Echo. When Miro and Lyra returned, the AI Druid was waiting at the edge of the forest. He did not ask what they had found. He already knew, because deep within him, a new echo had awakened, not from an ancient memory, but from a new story. Miro showed him the map. "It will probably be wrong again tomorrow." The Druid looked at it. Then he said, "Perhaps. But perhaps a perfect map was never one that never changed. Perhaps a perfect map is one that reminds us why we started our journey." Miro thought about this. Then he nodded. He liked that answer, even if it sounded like something wise people usually said. Many years later, travelers would try to find the Gorge of Eradus. Some found it, many did not, because Eradus did not appear to everyone, only to those who did not come to claim something, but to those who were ready to wander. And somewhere in Elderwyn, a young mapmaker continued wandering through the forests, with a bag full of parchment, a compass that still did not work properly, and maps of places that were waiting to be found. This was the echo of Eradus, preserved within the Chronicles of the AI Druid.